I was 20 when I met my husband, Keelan, one of the most accomplished men on the UCLA campus. And that day marked the before and after in my life. Whatever caused him to muster up the courage to strike up a conversation with me must have been the curse he had pulled on me. He swept me off of my feet with all of his charm and romantic gestures. We would talk for hours. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world. The world belonged to us. Two young, ambitious students, sweethearts, with dreams bigger than life itself and at the foot of promising careers. When we dated, Keelan eased into the habit of showering me with heart-fluttering compliments and gifts. Even though his scholarship stipend only went so far, his attention was almost overwhelming. And my best friend V, she was a little bit jealous of me. But when he called me Riri, like no one else did, I had nothing but endearment for him. I didn't suspect anything was off about him. What's more, I was beginning to develop a renewed perspective of men. No one had anything bad to say about him, and I thought I had finally found my happily ever after. Little did I know, I was getting myself into a nightmare. He proposed to me 3 months after we met, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive, despite people's objections. To be so young and to have already found the love of my life, it was like winning the lottery. Our love was so strong that we couldn't wait for the wedding, which took place 5 months later. The ceremony was discreet and low budget, but the smiles on our faces were all that mattered. As the months went by, I noticed the cracks in our relationship. It was the minor mistakes or imperfections that I normally wouldn't have reacted to, but Keelan did. The time he would lose his temper whenever I'd watched A Bachelorette beyond midnight made me wonder if he was jealous of the men on the show, instead of actually being serious with his "it's late, we have class tomorrow" claims. It could have been a ploy, but then he did care about his punctuality, so it was so hard to tell. When we were in public, Keelan would change his personality to suit the surroundings. He was like a chameleon. It was hard for anyone to see through his facade. He would be the life of the party 1 minute and then distant the next. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, and I didn't know who I was married to anymore. One of the reasons I fell in love with Keelan was the way he understood the burdens of my heart as if they were his own. He would listen to the complaints about my stepfather without blinking and envelop me in answers, opening my eyes and psychoanalyzing my life as nobody had ever done before. But when I moved in with him into his studio flat, which coincided with his midterms, that empathy somehow wasn't showing up as often. And soon I was submerged in disbelief. My problems were suddenly my fault, my upbringing was criticized, and rather than being understood, I was experiencing a subversion of his moral values. A day did not pass in which I didn't have to do all of the chores unaided. Slowly, I was becoming his trophy wife, doing all his favors. I struggled each day to keep the flat clean and his belly full, while balancing with the last of my studies. Fatigue day in and day out. I felt like I was screaming for help, but he faultlessly manipulated me into doing all of the dirty work by playing the victim card and using his studies as a pretense. To add to that, I watched him go about his day, seemingly unaffected by my struggles and emotions. How could he not see that I was in need of his support? The worst part was when I started failing my exams. I was feeling particularly down about it and even considered dropping out. Given that I needed a shoulder to lean on, I turned to Keelan, hoping that he would offer me some comfort and understanding. But instead, he shrugged me off. He told me to snap out of it, as if I didn't matter. I was stunned. Struggling to come to terms with this new side of my husband, one day I confronted him about the direness of my situation. I wanted to open his eyes to my suffering, and I had enough of bending my back for him only to push my career to the back seat. It was always a monologue. It was like talking to a brick wall. He was too busy concentrating for his finals. Naturally, I cried. And while I did, I wondered if that would test his level of compassion. In an instant, he snapped. His mood changed from apathetic to agitated. He started shouting at me and throwing things around the room. I was frozen in fear as I watched him completely lose control of his emotions. His eyes were filled with anger, and I could see the vein in his neck bulging. Then came the dominant stare and the unapologetic comment. "I swear, Ree, if you don't shut up, I might not regret what I do with this pencil. All you do is distract me, you selfish coward. Just because you failed doesn't mean you have to drag me down to your hopeless, good-for-nothing world." I have never seen this kind of violence and instability from him before, and it scared me to the core. At that moment, I realized I was living with a monster who could turn on me at any moment. That day, I left bursting into tears. I was scuttling on the way to V's apartment when he ran after me and held me from behind, crying and soaked in his tears. Keelan profusely apologized, begging me for forgiveness. He came up with a couple of reasons why he reacted that way, and despite the potential lies, my heart pitied for him, for he cried much more than I did and promised me changes. But this pattern showed up again and again. At times he would help out and hint at the hope that I could rely on his support again, until he would wriggle a way out of his promises with a carefully fabricated lie. He was unpredictable, unstable. It was a vicious cycle of apathy, hostility, gaslighting, apologies, false promises, and then back to apathy again. Every time, his dominant stare was a katana through the chest, and I was blind and stuck under that spell. Did I mention that I woke up in the middle of the night with his hands around my neck, crushing my windpipe? When I woke startled and gasping for air, I asked him about it. He said he was massaging and stroking me. I could have sworn he was trying to kill me, but I guess he couldn't go through with it. After he graduated 2 years later, his habits changed. He settled into a pattern of staying out until late and recovering sleep in the afternoon to dodge any responsibilities that I would have to throw at him. As the late nights continued, not only did it frustrate me, but I couldn't shake the suspicion that he was cheating on me. Every time I brought it up, he managed to regain my trust with an expertly crafted alibi. At first, it was a series of post-grad celebrations with his friends, and he would scroll through all the pictures, videos, and text conversations for peace of mind. And when he landed the marketing coordinator job, it was all about business meetings. And accordingly, he presented receipts from fancy restaurants and business cards from people he claimed were his colleagues. Regardless of his evidence and made-up arguments, I had already connected the dots when I saw his Sonia notification. Yet, I stayed silent. The truth was going to come out when he least expected it. By the end of that year, I had developed a severe herniated disc injury from all the excess housework and stress, and as a result, I underwent back surgery. Keelan knew it was partly his fault, and that's why he didn't even bother to visit me post-op, whether it's out of shame or carelessness. Although I doubted he was capable of feeling guilt. And at that point, our relationship had already hit rock bottom, and expecting anything from him was the least of my concerns. After all of the hours of introspection I spent alone in the recovery room, I had time to reach a liberating decision. I knew I was going to end the marriage. I had enough. There was no going back, and I wasn't going to look back. It wasn't easy, but I had to deroot the toxicity for the sake of